one of my overreactions is the Toronto Raptors, or I guess the Tampa Bay Raptors, are not a good basketball team. And so, just a quick breakdown of where we're sitting at right now. They're currently 0-3. They lost 93 to 100 to the 76ers just last night. They lost 114 to 119 to the Spurs in the game before. And on opening night, I think they lost to 99 to 113 to the Pelicans. So just off the bat, if you look at the three teams they lost to, like the 76ers are really the only team they should be losing to. In our preview, we were talking about how the Spurs, we don't think the Spurs are going to be a good team at all, and they've kind of defied expectations so far. But and even the Pelicans, who objectively haven't looked that great and should definitely be a tier below them, they lost pretty handily too. And yeah, so I just would like to talk about a couple of things I saw, particularly in the 76ers game last night. So they had a huge lead. I think they had like a 15-point lead going after the like midway through the second. It was a pretty sizable lead, but from watching the game, you could tell that a lot of their points came from just bad energy from the Sixers. And I don't want to make this about the Sixers, but they just didn't look good. They don't look like they had chemistry. Simmons was playing very passive, just a lot of lazy passes, easy steals for Anunoby and Van Vliet and Lowry, and they were running out in transition. And that led to a lot of the points that the Raptors were able to score. However, in the second half, after 76ers had to talk about this, and they kind of tightened up, and there were no more easy turnovers, and then the Raptors offense just completely stalled. It became really obvious they didn't really have a go-to move or a go-to play or a go-to player even. Like it was a lot of Lowry bringing up the ball, Lowry penetrating, kicking to Siakam, and Siakam's not good enough of a shooter for him to pull it like that. And he doesn't really have a good enough handle to drive effectively, was from what I saw, at least in that game. Granted, the 76ers are a relatively large team, and they do have a lot of good switches. I think they had Simmons on Siakam for the majority of the night, but there wasn't just good shot creation. Van Vliet was their only shot creator, and he got exposed as just being small. And it just the half court offense just did not exist. And yeah, so do you have any thoughts before I keep going on the Raptors?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of it. So partly, I'm not going to freak out about the Raptors yet, right? Because we know that their half-court offense was going to struggle. Right now, they're 30th. They're the worst team in the league in terms of offensive rating. They're second to the worst team in terms of points scored per game. So that's concerning, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is overall that big of an indicator of where they're going to be at the end of the entire season, right? I mean, we know their half-court offense is not great. They were the best team in transition last year. Like, that's still going to be their DNA, is getting out in transition and running. When they are in the half-court, their offense stalls a little bit, especially with Siakam. Siakam really has a tough time getting good quality shots in the half-court. With Lowry a year older, and Van Vliet has had some struggles shooting, it makes sense that their half-court offense hasn't been as great. I also think the downgrade from Baines and Len, downgrading from Gasol and Ibaka. Obviously, it's showed some things. And
yeah,
so
it's huge. Yeah, it's huge.
It's all concerning, right? Like these are all legitimate problems. I have trust in Nick Nurse that things will figure out, that he'll be able to figure out some things and like figure out some better ways to get that offense started a little bit, because their defense has been fine. Their defense is ranked 6th in the league, so that's not overly concerning.
Yeah.
What is concerning is the shots they've been getting, right? They've been taking the most amount of threes in the league, and they're shooting it at the 20th ranked team in the league. So
yeah, they just don't have a lot of shooters, really.
I think it's a little bit
problem.
of bad luck. Like last year, they were number 5 in the league in shooting, in 3-point percentage. So, dropping from 5 to 20th is a big deal, especially because their offense is so reliant on threes. They aren't big drivers. They really are mostly focused on trying to get an open 3-point shot. So I think it's a little bit of bad luck. I think part of it is the drop off by losing those guys last year. Their bench is just not the same. Last year, their bench could come in and really take over some games and keep up with the starters.
Yeah.
This year, they just don't have that depth. Yeah, and this year they just don't
that.
have that depth off the bench. But
not at all.
I still trust in Nick Nurse. I know it's like I'm beating a dead horse by saying that, but I just trust that he'll be able to figure out some things and that this team is not as bad as we've seen them be in the first couple of games.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is an overreaction pod, so I don't necessarily think they're going to miss the playoffs or whatever. I just don't think I think people coming to the season, the expectation was like the Raptors are up there to like fighting for like a top 4 seed, and I just don't see that this year at all. And I think that like the biggest part about them losing Gasol and Ibaka, like besides the fact that Ibaka was a great offensive threat off the bench, but it's their rebounding. Like they are like they just don't have that anymore. They're bottom three in the league in defensive rebounds. I know it's only 3 games, but that's like a pretty telling sign. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. They're a small team in general. Baines and Boucher aren't really inside presences in the traditional sense at all, either on offense or defense. Like Baines prefers to play on the perimeter anyways. And they're last in the league in rebounding percentage at 45% of the available rebounds that are like that they get. So they just are like they're limited on both ends in terms of rebounding. They're letting a lot of second chance points, letting teams like that was how the Sixers came back was a lot of Tobias Harris putbacks, Joel Embiid just on the biggest play of the game where the Sixers clinched it in the fourth quarter. Embiid gets an offensive rebound and kicks it open to a wide open Seth Curry, and that he hits a three, and that's it. Like that ends the game. And that's just the things that the Raptors are missing this year. Is their inside presence is awful. Um, and I do think they work hard and they're a well coached team. Like Nick Nurse coaches them well. Matt Thomas surprisingly gets like a lot of good shots because Nick Nurse is so good. But I just think at a certain point he can only do so much. Like this team, I just think isn't really constructed that well, and they don't have an alpha. And this is kind of leading into what I was talking about in our preview. Is that I think Masai Ujiri is waiting for this team to go like 1-6 or like 2-10 and being like, hey, we just don't have it anymore. Let's flip Siakam for some picks. Let's see what we can get for Kyle Lowry now. I think the reason why I can project them to be bad is because I think Masai Ujiri is willing to blow it up and he wants to blow it up. And he knows that he has a good coach in Nick Nurse, and that's not the problem. It's clearly the roster. And I think that also has to play in itself. And despite all the slander, I do think that Anunoby looked really good last night. He's big, versatile ring. His shooting seems to have gotten much better. Physically guarded Simmons well. So I don't think all is bad. I just think that they're just much worse than people had thought they were going to be. And I think a lot of it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of makes sense. It makes sense the reasons they haven't been so good in the early season. Like you were saying, like when they're not rebounding well, they can't get out in transition well, and that's when they're going to score the majority of their points. And when you look at the teams they've played, save the Spurs, you have New Orleans who have Zion and Steven Adams down there. Like that's two big rebounding presence. In Philly, that is a tall team still, with Embiid and Simmons. Like those are two great rebounders. So it makes sense why they've been getting, not as many rebounds, not being able to run as much. So when you look at trades, though, I think we're going to learn a lot about Masai from the way he trades these players. Because when you think about Kyle Lowry, right? Like, so they're three biggest assets right now: Kyle Lowry, Siakam, and Van Vliet. When you think about Lowry is the best Toronto Raptor of all time. Now, could they trade him, and could they go the Celtics route where they traded Pierce and Garnett, a couple of years ago? Like, yeah, they could do that. Lowry's on an expiring deal, right? So, they could trade him and see what they get for it. But there's not a ton of teams that are really like super, super short at that point guard position, right? So like, what are you getting for Lowry? It's probably something similar in the mold of like what they got for, like, or what they had to give up for Gasol, right? Like kind of like a heavily protected pick, maybe a player who kind of matches the salary, who's probably not worth that contract. Like, so we could see what they get for Lowry, but that's trading your franchise centerpiece. That is completely signaling to your fan base that you're waving the white flag on this season. In terms of Siakam, yeah, he's shown his limits as an offensive player, right? Obviously he's not going to be the number one for a team. He's not great creating offense for himself. He's not great in the half court, but he's still a pretty decently young player. He's still coming
He's
along.
not that young.
He's not
He
that
really
young.
isn't.
He's like 26.
Yeah, he's like 27. Like he's
So he still
not
has room to
that
grow. Like
young.
he isn't a finished product as a player overall. I think Siakam is probably the piece that you get the most from if you're really thinking about it. And then in terms of
Yeah,
Van Vliet, because they just signed him,
they
there's going to
can't
be
trade
some
him
kind of
until
restriction on. Yeah,
yeah
there's going
for
to
a
be
little
some
bit.
kind of. Obviously, the dates are different because the season starting
Yeah,
dates are different, but there's going to be some kind of restriction on trading Van Vliet.
I think it's 60 days. I think it's 60 days.
So I mean, they still have some time to figure it out. And there's a path to them getting better, right? Fred Van Vliet has been
Yeah,
terrible shooting the first couple of games. If he
yeah.
heats up, that helps him out a lot. There was a lot of talk about OG Anunoby making a leap this year, and they just really haven't been using him that much more as an offensive player. So I think there's a path for them to start using OG more and to give him the ball more and to see what they can do. And hey, who knows? Maybe he gets a little bit better on it. And
I
then
don't know.
switching the offense from shooting the most amount of threes in the league to taking that down a little bit. Their 3-point percentage will come back up. That's just a little bit of luck and getting to the free throw line and driving more. And then hopefully someone on that bench emerges. So there's a path for them to still be a
Yeah,
competitive
but
team, but it's still going to be at the bottom of the East, kind of like we predicted. So it's up to Masai what he's
yeah.
really going to want to do and what that, who knows if like the team president's there and if the organization really wants to compete and just be in the playoffs, if that's what's important to them
I think
rather than
this is
competing for a championship.
just like a good year to tank. Like no fans. They're in Tampa. They have like a built-in excuse. They're in Tampa. They're not even in Toronto this year. I mean, like, dude, if you could get like 3 first-round picks and like a nice player for Siakam, like I don't know what team needs Siakam right now, but like I feel like you would pull the trigger if you're Masai Ujiri. I just don't think the
You
Raptors are
think you would
good.
you would trade Siakam even though he's still like that's the best quote unquote
I
young
just
piece
don't
they have
know
besides Van
what the
Vliet.
idea is. Like I think that he needs to kind of be in a win now scenario. Like this is the prime of his career. He clearly can't be a number one option. He's clearly much better suited as a third option as he was when the Raptors won the championship. And he was awful in those playoffs too. Granted, it was his first playoffs, but he was terrible. Like I think you kind of know what you have with Siakam now. Like I think you absolutely I don't think he's getting much better than he is. Like he's not that young and he's getting a lot of the offense already. So I don't know what more you need to see. I just think that if you can let Lowry expire, you don't need to trade him. Van Vliet's a fine piece, and if you move off Siakam and a couple other pieces, build for the future. Next year you come back and you retool and you be better. Like I don't know.
I mean, I think you're right. I think in a strictly team building sense, you're right. Like there's no path to championship contention for this team. They don't have the pieces to trade for anything. So you're right. Um, I just don't I'm not sure if the Raptors are all about that championship mentality where they might just be okay competing for the bottom of the playoffs and riding out Lowry's career and having him be a lifetime Raptor and retiring his jersey. I'm not sure if they are going to go like, it's kind of like the emotional versus the economic method, right?
Yeah.
Emotionally, for that fan base, they're probably still happy that they won a championship, a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
And they're
that's why you
happy that
trade.
they have like their little core of guys there that like they really like. These are all like their homegrown players, save Lowry. Like, there's some
Yeah,
pride in having these guys and being
I
competitive for a
guess.
championship. Economically, yeah, they should trade all these guys right now and start rebuilding through the draft. And it'd be a great year too because there's not that many teams that are tanking. Like if they
Yeah.
trade those 3 guys, they will be at the bottom of the East, no problem.
Yeah.